if there's something you want, it's important to stop and think, what are the potential bad outcomes and what can I do to reduce the likelihood of those events? Recognizing that every time we make a potential bad outcome less likely, we can make the odds of our desired outcome more likely.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Helping with Dr. Richard Schuster. Food for the brain, knowledge from the experts, tools to win at life. I'm your host, Dr. Richard. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, and whatever you do, this is the show that is going to help you become the best version of yourself. Each episode, you will hear from some of the most amazing, talented, and successful people on the planet who followed their passions and strive to help others. Join our movement to get 1 million people each day to commit acts of kindness for others. Together, we're going to make the world a better place. Are you ready? Because it's time for your Daily Helping. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Daily Helping Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Richard, and our guest today is amazing. Kyle Austin Young is an award-winning strategy consultant for high achievers, entrepreneurs, and leaders in a variety of fields. The work has given him an opportunity to develop and refine a powerful system for accomplishing big, meaningful goals that focus on understanding and changing your odds of success. Kyle's a popular writer for Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, the Boston Globe, CNBC, Psychology Today, Forbes, and Business Insider. When he's not writing, consulting, or spending time with his family, you'll usually find him fishing. He's here to talk today about his newest book, which is available everywhere tomorrow. Success is a Numbers Game. Achieve bigger goals by changing the odds. This is going to be an awesome episode. Kyle, welcome to the Daily Helping. It is amazing to have you with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Richard. I can't believe I'm here. This is going to be great.
This is going to be so great. So, as you know, I'm so fascinated by why people do what they do. And what I want to start with is I want to jump in the Kyle Austin Young time machine, and let's go back and talk to us about kind of those pivotal key moments in your life that put you on the path today that you're on. And we'll start there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I held leadership positions in a couple of organizations, and I went through 2 layoffs back to back. And at that time, my wife and I were in the process of trying to adopt our first child, which is famously expensive. And twice I had to go back to her and say, so I lost my job. And I had a skill set, and every time I lost one, I had a lot of different job offers. But I had gotten so tired of these layoffs that I said, I've got to find some way to diversify. I need to find some way to apply my skill set in a way where I can never have to go back to my wife again, especially in the middle of this adoption process and say, we're going to need to press pause on this while I go find another management level position. So instead, I decided to start using my skill set to consult with a variety of organizations, a variety of high achievers and leaders. And that gave me the opportunity to, ensure that I was always going to have multiple income streams. So that was the motivation 10 years ago. Over the last 10 years, it's obviously shifted a lot. It's become an opportunity to impact more people, to, serve a greater list of clients and then their customer bases, and also just an opportunity to learn a lot. And I've really had the privilege of studying under some amazing people just through my client relationships. They learn a little bit about what I know. I learn a little bit about what they know. And I think it's made me a more well-rounded consultant. So 10 years later, as you mentioned, there have been opportunities to write for places like Harvard Business Review. There have been opportunities to consult on some really exciting projects and ultimately to write the book. And we were able to successfully adopt our daughter. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that was the happy ending to that story. It certainly did solve some of the income problems too.
That's outstanding. And I liked a few things you said there. You said the opportunity to impact people, and you led with that. And so we love people on this program who want to make money, but want to do that helping other people. I think that's exciting. And the other thing you said is that your clients get to learn about you, you get to learn about them. One of the things that I used to tell patients when I saw them was, look, I have a degree in mental health, but you're the expert in you, because we're always learning and everybody has something to teach us. And so this book, though, is so fascinating to me, Kyle, because, when I read about it and was introduced to it, it seemed like, okay, are we working statistics here? Is this like chaos theory? How are we gaming our odds? How can we do this? And I know that you've built a framework about this. So as we jump into this, why now? Like, why did you write the book now?
Why did I write the book now? The premise of the book is simple. It's every goal that you're pursuing has two hidden numbers attached to it. There's a probability of success and a probability of failure. And what I found is that most people don't really even stop to think about that. And I think there's a couple of reasons. I think that one is we assume that our odds of success are just unknowable. Unless someone tells us what our odds are, we could never even get a sense of those on our own. And then beyond that, I think a lot of people see their odds as unchangeable. And so as I was researching the book and even in my own consulting work, I started to notice that there were some people who had an aversion. They didn't want to know what their odds were because if it was bad, then it might be something that would discourage them from going after something that they wanted to. And so what I was able to do through my consulting work, ultimately my job, no matter who I was working with or what they wanted to accomplish, my job was to do everything in my power to help the person get the outcome they were looking for. And so in the first 5 years of my 10-year consulting career, I had the opportunity to just get a lot of reps in, so to speak, in developing plans that were optimized for success. And also, after we got a sense of how likely a person was to accomplish something, we could certainly make some decisions about what projects to pursue and what not to pursue. But we could also optimize their odds of success. And so just every year, it felt like a new piece of the puzzle came into place. And then for the last 5 years, I've been able to really use that at full steam, so to speak, and has been an opportunity again to write the book. And so, like you mentioned, why now? One of the reasons is I reached a place in my consulting where I was having to say no more than I was saying yes. And one of the things that became really validating for me in those moments was when I could at least send people somewhere. That was one of the reasons that I was motivated to write for some of the websites that I've written for, is I would get the same questions over and over again. So I would go write it on a site like Forbes. And then when they asked me, I would say, I can't hop on a call about that today, but read this. This is exactly the answer I would tell you if I could do that. And so sometimes I could make introductions, sometimes I could send them out to a piece of writing. But that became really validating for me to know that I was still helping people, even if I couldn't work with them, if it didn't make sense. The book was an opportunity to address a gap that I just didn't have anything I could send people to, which was really over the years, originally when I was consulting and still am, the question is kind of, what do you think? I have a problem. I have a goal. What do you think about this? What do you think I should do? And as time's gone on, the question shifted a little bit. As people watched my clients succeeding beyond expectation, it changed a little bit to, how do you think? And I hadn't thought too much about how I think. That wasn't something I'd put a lot of thought into. And so the book was an opportunity to really unpack that in a framework that explains why I believe some of the people I've worked with have enjoyed such remarkable results. And I was motivated to do it now because it felt like the right time to be able to empower more people with something that's been helpful for me while I continue to, go deeper with a relatively small list of clients.
It's interesting too, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about how loaded goals are in general, right? Like we could have a goal, I'd like to see my business scale by 17.2% a year over the next 5 years. Or we could have a goal that, you know what, I'm going on American Idol and I'm going to get that ticket to Hollywood, right? And one goal is probably realistic and one goal is probably not. And yet there are countless people who, in the face of ridiculous odds, have achieved those goals and been able to succeed despite the whole world probably telling them that they're insane, right? So how do we handicap the goals in the first place to say, or don't we? Do we just say, here's a goal, and then let's calculate the probability? So I guess that's kind of two questions, but I'll let you start wherever you want with those.
Yeah, so the book can kind of be divided into two sections. The first half is getting a sense of your odds of success. And so with your permission, I'll do kind of a thought exercise to just illustrate how that works. Would that be all right?
Sure.
So if I were consulting with you, I'd have a whiteboard, or we'd have screen share. In the book we have some diagrams, but I want to kind of just explain this a little bit verbally. So let's imagine that I'm going to flip a coin and you're going to get to pick heads or tails. We're playing a game, and if you pick the correct side, you win. And so you pick heads. What are your odds of winning the game? We flip one coin, you've picked heads. If it's heads, you win the game. What are your odds?
50%.
50%. Yeah, that's exactly right. So let's change the game a little bit. Let's say that we're actually going to flip the coin 3 times, and you need it to land on heads all 3 times in order to win the game. What are your odds of winning the game now?
Becomes a third, is that correct?
It becomes pretty close to that. The way that we figure this out, and many people don't know this, you're already closer, it's a little bit lower than a third, is we multiply the likelihood of each of those events together. So 0.5 times 0.5 times 0.5. So what we end up with is 0.125. There's a 12.5% chance of that happening. And while our goals in real life are more complex than flipping a coin that could land on heads or tails, the basic principle still holds. If we can identify what has to go right in order for you to get what you want, we can estimate the likelihood of those individual ingredients, multiply it together, and we can get a real sense of what your odds of success are going to be. And what is universally shocking for almost anyone is how low their odds are at almost any goal they would want to pursue. And it comes down again to that multiplication. If you have, let's say that you're an aspiring musician and you've been given the opportunity to play at a new venue, and they say that you can come, but here's the deal. We want you to have a full band. You play rhythm guitar, but we want a lead guitarist, we want a bass guitarist, and we want a drummer. We want a full band put together if you're going to come and play this gig for us tonight. So let's say that you think you have a 90% chance of, before the day's up, finding a lead guitarist. You have an 80% chance of finding a bass player. You have a 70% chance of finding a drummer. Individually, all of those sound pretty good, right? We've got 0.9, we've got 0.8, we've got 0.7. That sounds like something that we could probably pull off when we look at those individually. When we multiply them together, it's 0.504. That's 50.4%. That's a coin toss. So we're leaving our reputation with this venue up to a coin toss. And so what a lot of people find when they actually stop and consider how many things have to go right in order for them to get what they want, they estimate how likely those are individually. And a lot of times those numbers will feel pretty good when you look at them and you kind of average them in your head, but you're not supposed to average, you're supposed to multiply. And when people do that, what they typically find is we would predict them to fail if we don't find some way to intervene and change those odds. And I think that's an explanation for a lot of what we see in our world. These are loose numbers, but we hear that 9 out of 10 businesses fail. We hear that most people who lose weight will gain it back. We hear that a large majority of mergers and acquisitions don't create lasting value. Why is that happening? Well, there's so many things that need to go right that when you multiply them all together, you find that we wouldn't expect that we wouldn't expect a good outcome from that. And so that's kind of the first half of the book. And then the second half is we talk about how do we change your odds.
And what I'm hearing in my mind as you're telling me this, Han Solo screaming, "Never tell me the odds."
That's right. Never tell me. That was in the book at one time. It came out, but that was in there briefly.
I find this interesting, and you're right. The overwhelming majority of businesses that start fail, and you clearly proved very quickly how poor I am at math. But it's interesting too because everybody who goes after a goal believes they're going to achieve the goal or have the chance to achieve the goal. So if we know that statistically speaking, the odds are not in our favor, I suspect you have some strategies and tips so that we can tilt that scale a little bit in the opposite direction and increase the odds of our success.
Well, we can often do it really significantly. And while I share a little bit of the mathematical basis for the framework, just so people can understand it and, rely on it, that's not necessarily a huge part of the approach. The approach isn't really something that you do with a calculator. The approach, in many ways, boils down to this idea of what I call the rule of 100%. For any event, the odds of all possible outcomes add up to 100%. So we talked about flipping a coin earlier. There was a 50% chance of heads, a 50% chance of tails. That adds up to 100%. What that tells us is that we can't make one outcome more likely without making other outcomes less likely. And so what I found in my consulting work is one of the easiest ways to create a plan that's optimized for a person's success is to spend some time considering what are the potential bad outcomes that could happen instead of what we want, and how can we make those as unlikely as possible. If we stop and ask the question, what if, something that a lot of people are scared to do, we're maybe going in asking for promotion and we think, what if my boss is in a bad mood? And perhaps, a friend says, oh, don't think like that. I think you should think like that. I think you absolutely should think, what if my boss is in a bad mood? And I think the next question is, what can we do about that? If we can reduce the likelihood of our boss being in a bad mood, if we show up with a cup of coffee, if we walk by the office first, peek in and try to get a sense of how the day's going, if we ask our boss's assistant, are they in a good mood today? And we try to time that, then we've reduced the risk of a potential bad outcome, which is my boss doesn't offer me the promotion because he or she are in a bad mood, right? When we reduce the risk of these bad outcomes, that probability has nowhere to go except toward what we want. We've taken that bad outcome off the table or reduced the likelihood of it. And in doing so, we've made it more likely that we're going to get what we were ultimately aiming for. And so what I teach people how to do in the book is create a success diagram. We diagram out what are the things that have to go right in order for us to get what we want. And then what we do is we stop for each one of those prerequisites that I call critical points, and we write out what are the potential bad outcomes. Maybe I need someone's approval in order to get this project assigned to me. Well, what are the potential bad outcomes that could happen instead of me getting that person's approval? Maybe I don't get it for this reason. I don't get it for that reason. And then we stop and we look for ways to hack that. We look for ways to diminish the likelihood of those bad outcomes. There's not a lot of math involved. If you want to, you can layer numbers onto that and use it to try to create a loose prediction of how likely you are to succeed. With that, you can track your odds over time. Every time you complete a step, your odds are going to go up significantly. And I think there is real value in assigning numbers. One of the reasons for that is when we identify really low probability steps on the path to our goal, we can make exciting strategic decisions. Your odds of success at a goal will never be higher than the odds of your most improbable prerequisite. So if you need five things to go right, and there's a 99% chance that four of them are going to happen and a 10% chance that one of them is going to happen, your odds automatically are lower than 10%. We need that thing to go right for you to accomplish this goal, and there's only a 10% chance it's going to happen. Well, what can we do with that knowledge? One thing we can do is we can potentially take that really uncertain step, and we might be able to address it first in the process. It might be something that we could try immediately. Maybe it's, again, a person's approval. We'll stick with that analogy. Rather than asking for that at the end, maybe it would be good to ask for that at the beginning so that if it doesn't go well, we can fail fast instead of spending a bunch of time on these high probability steps only to then fail at the last minute, having wasted a lot more time and a lot more resources. So I think there is value to layering numbers on it, but you don't necessarily have to do that. It really just comes down to understanding that for me to accomplish a goal, I need to identify what has to go right. If I were to multiply those things together, that would be my odds of success. But for each one of those things, there's potential bad outcomes that are hogging probability. And if I want to step into that and look for creative solutions to minimize those risks, I can dramatically improve my chances of getting what I want.
I like this a lot, Kyle, and there's actually a psychological parallel to this in cognitive behavioral therapy, where a lot of times people have catastrophic thinking, right? And so from a clinical standpoint, you're addressing their catastrophic thinking with Socratic questioning, asking them questions like, how do you know that's going to happen? What's the worst thing that could happen if your fear comes true? So really what we're doing is we're doing a probability analysis on each of those terrible things, and people do, in my profession do this therapeutically, but you're taking this equation and saying, okay, let's take a look at everything that's on the table from a variable, what has to happen for this whole thing to fall apart. And I love that. That's actually probably the inverse of how most people view everything, right? And we know they've done a lot of research on work, right? And what's the one thing for productivity that people tell you about hard tasks? Do the hard task first.
Yeah, eat your frog first.
Yeah. And so if you're listening to this and you get a new business idea or you're planning something revolutionary, do the impossible thing first. Because if it doesn't happen, you've saved yourself a ton of time and money. And so I'm loving this conversation, Kyle. I am curious because, I know the information, the marketing materials for the book talked about this book has some really interesting stories from some very disconnected people, right?
Sure.
Abe Lincoln and Marilyn Monroe and a forensic pathologist. If you would, I find this so fascinating. Share a story or two of how those things kind of connect and fit into this, because I'm beyond intrigued about that.
One of the stories that you mentioned, Marilyn Monroe, I'll tell the story of Norma Jean Dougherty. This is a woman who's working in an aviation munitions factory in World War II when a photographer comes out to take pictures for an army magazine that's designed to inspire the armed forces. And when he's there, he notices that Norma Jean is a beautiful woman, and he says, would you be interested in doing some modeling for me? And so she agrees. He takes some pictures of her. She ends up on some magazine covers, and then ultimately rises to stardom as an actress under the stage name Marilyn Monroe. And so one of the reasons I call that story out is in the first chapter, I talk about the fact that there are four paths to success. There's not one, but there's actually four. Some people succeed because they pursue goals where they have a high probability of success. And with this framework, you can get a sense of what those goals are. Other people succeed at unlikely goals because they essentially get lucky. So they take a path that we wouldn't expect to result in success, but there's power in repeated attempts, right? If we see something as having a 20% chance of success, some people would hear that as, oh, that's something that's going to fail. What that actually means is that if we could replicate that 5 times, we would expect 1 success and 4 failures, right? So the person who receives the success didn't necessarily make a smart decision, but if there are enough people trying, we would expect some people to succeed because of the way the predictions work out. And that's what I would argue, happens with Marilyn Monroe. It's not a 20% chance of success to go from a factory worker to a movie star just because somebody comes by to take a few pictures, but she's somebody who gets lucky. The third path to success is we have an opportunity to exercise repeated attempts in the pursuit of our own goals. So we can essentially act as our own miniature society. We can experience the predicted failures and the predicted success if we're willing to try several times at certain types of goals. And then the fourth path is probability hacking. After we get a sense of your odds, we're going to figure out how to change them. So when it comes to the story of Marilyn Monroe, why I think that's powerful is we're constantly propping up successful people and then trying to figure out a way to reverse engineer their success story. And sometimes that's very appropriate. But what if we're looking at people who succeeded through the path of just getting lucky, right? Would it make sense for an aspiring model to take a job at an aviation's munitions factory in hopes that a photographer might stop by one day? I don't think that would make a lot of sense. And yet I think that a huge percentage of the internet, when it comes to personal development device, or certainly in the fields of business and entrepreneurship, is taking someone whose success we don't fully understand the origins of, and then just saying, okay, well, they drive a blue car, so everybody drive a blue car if you want to be the next big thing. I'm not super compelled by that. So that would be one story from the book that I think speaks to what you're talking about.
You got to ask the Abe Lincoln one just because it's so interesting.
Yeah, Abraham Lincoln. So what that actually is the story is about the story of the Emancipation Trail Steady Act. So I talk a little bit about the Emancipation Proclamation, which is something that is often oversimplified in American schools. When Abraham Lincoln issues this proclamation, he actually only outlaws slavery in the Confederate states. He doesn't outlaw slavery in the northern states that practice it. And so I tell a story about, on Juneteenth when General Granger ultimately delivers the news to Galveston that this proclamation was in effect and had been for several years. It sparked this migration of these formerly enslaved people who chose to move from Galveston to Houston. It's a 51-mile walk. And they wanted to get away from this place where they'd been in slavery for all these years. And so they pack their stuff up. They walk 51 miles, often through forests. I mean, they're not driving on the highway. This is them and all of their stuff and their children. They make this 51-mile trek. And so Sheila Jackson Lee and John Cornyn team up to try to pass a resolution to make that a national historic trail. The Park Service maintains dozens of them. They commemorate things like Lewis and Clark's expedition, the Trail of Tears. And so in the book, I tell the story of how they took this bill that had the potential to be very divisive and ultimately did some really impressive probability hacking to get it through the House, to get it through the Senate, and ultimately get it signed into law to commission a study that would decide whether or not to make this a national historic trail. So for them, some potential bad outcomes when it came to making it through these different branches of the legislature were failing due to partisan division, potentially failing due to various prejudices. And so one of the ways they really overcame that was through this alliance. We had a white male senator and a black female congresswoman who team up together. And because of that, they were able to crush a lot of potential bad outcomes by advocating for the bill in unison.
This is so interesting to me. I know that you do this with a lot of entrepreneurs and businesses, and you're well known for that. But I'm thinking about even as a parent. We were chatting a little bit offline before about our kids and take them to aquariums and this, that, and the other. And I'm thinking, in terms of helping your families, game their own success, right? So how we could leverage this to enhance our kids' academic success or, strengthen our relationships with our significant other. Is that touched on in the book? Or I presume the same principles could apply, but I'm curious if there's any specific, non-businessy examples in the book.
Yeah, there are a lot of non-business examples. I talked earlier just about the goal of playing at a local music venue, but you'll find a lot of examples in the book. Ultimately, what it comes down to on a day-by-day basis is if there's something you want, it's important to stop and think, what are the potential bad outcomes and what can I do to reduce the likelihood of those events? Recognizing that every time we make a potential bad outcome less likely, we can make the odds of our desired outcome more likely. Something that surprises a lot of people is, let's say that you have a goal and there are some prerequisites for accomplishing that goal. There are always going to be. If there weren't, you would already have the thing that you wanted. So let's say that there's a 70% chance that each of your prerequisites comes into being in pursuit of this goal. So here's a question, and my goal is to trip you up a little bit, Dr. Richard, so thank you for playing along. But if there's a 70% chance that each of these prerequisites come into being, how many prerequisites could you have before we would expect you to fail.
So continuing to reference pop culture, I'm going to quote the Chevy Chase skit.
Sure.
I was told that there would be no math.
That's right. Yeah, I apologize for that.
Uh,
Easier when I have a whiteboard. But no, but again, my goal is to demonstrate that this is surprising. I don't expect you to necessarily have that answer. If we have a 70% chance of each of these things happening, we can only have one prerequisite before we would expect this goal to fail. If we have even two prerequisite steps that each have a 70% chance of happening, we're already below 50% on the goal as a whole. So that's what makes it so important as we go through our lives to stop and examine the things that we want, to really consider the potential bad outcomes, and to be intentional about minimizing the likelihood of those. So many people try to respond to uncertainty with willpower, with belief that you have a great work ethic, with trying to manifest a certain reality. If we were flipping a coin again and I said, I'm going to bet you my house that this coin's going to land on heads, and you knew that it wasn't some kind of a trick coin, you might say, boy, that's a big risk. You're taking on a lot of uncertainty there. What makes you so confident to wager your house on this coin landing on heads? And what if I responded and said, well, I just really want it to land on heads? You'd say, I don't know if that's going to change the outcome. Well, you don't understand, Dr. Richard. I have an incredible work ethic. Okay, maybe, but I'm not sure how that's going to change the outcome of this coin landing on heads. Well, the reality is many of us are doing that in the context of our goals. We think that if we want it enough, it'll happen somehow. When in reality, it would be better to stop and ask the question, what are the things that could happen instead of what I want? And how can I minimize the likelihood of those? That's an actual recipe for changing your odds. Wanting it more doesn't change them.
I am loving this conversation. This is something that anybody who's an entrepreneur in business thinks about goals constantly, right?
Sure.
And having done this for 9+ years, this is the first conversation I've ever had with anybody who's really people talk about operationalizing goals. This is very different, right? Like you're basically running probability indicators on the steps necessary for a goal to succeed or fail. I think this is beyond interesting. And I think your book is going to help so many people. Kyle, this conversation has been an absolute treat. As you know, I wrap up every episode by asking my guests just this one question. And that is, what is your biggest helping, that one most important piece of information you'd like somebody to walk away with after hearing our conversation today?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that there is a place for what if thinking in our lives. There is a place for considering what could go wrong. That's not being negative or being a cynic. That's not, something that is demotivating in a harmful way. When we stop and actually ask the question, how could this go in a way that maybe wouldn't be what I was pursuing? We have an opportunity to then brainstorm ways to solve that. In the book, I tell stories of how I became a department manager. This is a long time ago. When I was 21 years old, I was leading people who were double my age, sometimes more, because I just stopped and really thought through all of the reasons that they might not hire me. And then I just took all of them off the table. And by the end of it, I remember having one person who said, I don't want to hire you because it's weird. You're so much younger than me, but I can't think of any reason not to hire you. And I thought, hey, I did it. That was the goal. The goal was to take all the potential bad outcomes off the table. So whatever the goal might be, if you can find a way to figure out what, again, might happen that is not what you want, then you have an opportunity for some critical thinking. And I give you a lot of ways to kind of stir those thoughts up in the book when it comes to ideation, when it comes to decision making. But ultimately, the goal is to sell reality on the outcome that you're most interested in by taking away the opportunity cost of these other opportunities. Take those off the table, and you'll typically get what you want.
Amazing. The book is Success is a Numbers Game. Achieve Bigger Goals by Changing the Odds. It is available everywhere tomorrow, but we will have the pre-order link in the show notes at drrichardschuster.com. But Kyle, if somebody wants to learn more about your work, where can they find out about you online?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to kyleaustinyoung.com. That's an opportunity to sign up for my newsletter, over 100,000 business leaders. And every week I send out fresh ideas that are designed to help you optimize your odds of success at a variety of goals, both in your work life and in your personal life.
Amazing. Kyle, I have loved every moment of our time together. I am beyond grateful for it. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Daily Helping.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Awesome. And to each and every one of you who listened to this, if you're going to go calculate your probability odds, if you're on your goals, if you like this, if you're excited, go give us a follow and a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice, because this is what helps other people find the show. But most importantly, Go out there today and do something nice for somebody else, even if you don't know who they are, and post in your feeds using the hashtag #MyDailyHelping, because the happiest people are those that help others.